Thanks for listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast brought to you by DraftKings. NBA Finals going on. That means you put in $5, you get $150 in free plays if you're a new customer. Doesn't matter who wins. Now, joined by somebody who does have a stake and I think is rooting for a team in this, Kevin O'Neill, a.k.a. Matt Muehlebach. Hello, Matt.
What's up, Luke? How you doing, buddy?
Not too bad. First of all, you had a fun past weekend. Fill the folks in on what Matt Muehlebach gets to do during the off season.
Oh man, I've been luckily my daughter, both my daughters decided to play volleyball as opposed to basketball.
Right.
And in addition to that, they play beach volleyball. So I've been the last few weekends in Hermosa Beach, Santa Monica, Huntington Beach, you name it, on the beach volleyball circuit for high school kids. So it's been fun.
Okay. All right. Now let's talk a little bit of Warriors basketball here. And for the longest time, and you and I have talked about this before, but I wanted to get back into this a little bit. One of my biggest pet peeves in all of sports is when somebody says, well, they should be able to win a championship. Look how talented they are, or this, that, and the other. And I think Steve Kerr heard that. Steve Kerr heard that quite a bit, which was insane because it's not like Steve Kerr got to the Warriors and they had already won 4 championships. This was a team that was, with all due respect to Mark Jackson, they were essentially going 44-38, something like that every year. Steve Kerr takes over. They start winning 70 games, winning championships. So first, and you played on a very talented team in 1988, 89. You've got to be a good coach to win as well there, Matt, even with the talent.
Yeah, I mean, Kerr's done an amazing job, and I think where I would start with him, what he's done is he's done it since day one with the Warriors is the culture, and what he did there really brought in an amazing culture. They had like a vision or a strategy about how they were going to play,
right?
And it had nothing to do with X's and O's, even though people talk about that a lot. And it was about how they play together, how they play with joy. The teamwork they play with. And so, you've seen that over the years and, people forget the last couple of years, they didn't make the playoffs.
Right.
They had guys that are, obviously an aging superstar in Steph, an injured and aging superstar in Clay, trying to get all these new guys that had no championship DNA. And, I think a lot of this year is the work that he did the last 2 years. And did it under tough circumstances because people were expecting every year for them to be in the finals. They weren't. They were getting a little bit of grief for that. I remember he told me one time, I don't get paid to coach, or when I was playing, I didn't get paid to play. I get paid for after the game, for dealing with, the hassles after and the criticisms and stuff for that, like that. But incredible job with their culture and continuing to, try to get better. And they made some moves the last couple of years. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. Look at what he's done on the development with Wiggins. I mean,
right.
That's off the charts what they've done there. People forget too, this Warriors team is not vintage Warriors.
Right.
They got 2 guys in the starting lineup that don't shoot at all. Can't they don't make shots over 2-3 feet or layups or dunks. So 60% of their team is shooters, but 40% when they start, so they're playing off of that. You have teams like, I know you're a big Luka fan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
you became a big Luka fan too.
Did. You, I mean, not that I didn't know he was a good player, but you turned me on to how good he was and how ridiculously good he is. And, he just goes pick and roll. Not that Jason Kidd did a good job too, but, pick and roll, they have shooters everywhere. They put them on the perimeter. And Kerr doesn't have that. I mean, they're playing old school, running off pin downs and screens and all kinds of different actions. And so he deserves to be coach of the year this year, like by a mile, I think.
I would totally agree with that. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the spacing that they have, which I think is absolutely insane. Just watching from an outsider point of view, they're maybe the one team in the league that you have to cover essentially every spot within the half-court setting. Everybody cuts, everybody moves. You've got a guy like Steph Curry, who is one of the greatest shooters, but also one of the better underrated one-on-one players, and the ball never sticks. And in this ISO era of three-point shots, getting yours, it's really unique there, Matt.
It really is. Yeah. And, I think it was it Johnny Bach that used to say, you need to make
It was
a move.
Johnny Buck. I know that quote you're going with too.
It's like you need to make a decision within like literally less than a half a second. And
Right.
the decision is, are you going to shoot it? Are you going to pass it? Are you going to drive it? And those guys do a great job of that. You know what I love? Watch Wiggins tonight. When Wiggins is on the wing, I think he does as good a job as anybody in the league. When someone gets it at the block, like Clay will post up, or even Looney or someone like that, he dives to the lane. He dives to the rim, and he gets 2 or 3 buckets a game like that. And it's because he doesn't stand. And he moves, but moving toward the rim. And I remember one of the great quotes of Lute, for 4 years playing with him, and he would yell in that Lute voice and deep and kind of, a little bit angry, like, move. And that was he would
Right.
say it, 10, 15 times a game. And Steve probably hears that in the back of his mind, and his team really, like you said, they just move constantly.
When I look at obviously, because Steve Kerr, if there's a player out there that has played for better coaches, I would love to know who that is. From
Right.
Luke to Phil to Gregg Popovich. You know what I sense, though? I sense a little bit of Popovich. I sense a little bit of Phil Jackson in. And the Phil Jackson part is how he is able to get everybody going towards that one vision, which is a
Right.
big part when you're dealing with grown men. The Popovich part, though, that I think is maybe a little bit underrated here is how Popovich was able to extend that Spurs window. Everybody thought that it was closing when Duncan, Ginobili, Parker are getting older. You bring in Kawhi. Those guys are still doing their thing, but they're doing it at about 80% of what they're doing. Kawhi takes a bigger role. You see that now with Jordan Poole. The way that he's able to utilize the roster, but also elongate these guys' careers, I think is something that goes under the radar there, Matt.
Yeah, no, and I think a couple of things. I think that goes back to culture, right? I mean, you have that continuous thread of culture throughout every team, and it's a as they said, championship DNA.
Right.
And you see that in some of their games where they maybe almost shouldn't win, and they eke them out. But I think Steve told me a couple of things that Pop does that I think Steve takes from him. One is he coaches players very differently, and Steve talked to me about coaching Tony Parker, how he could just ride him like Kevin O'Neal would ride somebody. But Kawhi, he would not ride at all because he didn't take it like Tony did. It was a different, just different personality. And so he was incredibly good at understanding the buttons to push for each player. And I think, and Pop evolved. When Kerr first got to San Antonio, they ran a pretty simple offense. Pop really evolved. They'd put Sean and Elliott in the corner. They'd kind of go pick and roll with Duncan, put Timmy in the high post. They really evolved into kind of emotion. They ran a lot of really cool plays. And I think Steve took that. The other thing he took from Pop, and I was actually at a game that it was one of Steve's last games in San Antonio that he ever played. A bunch of friends went out there to watch him and kind of, celebrate his last season. And they had lost the night before. And the next day we were actually in the practice facility. They had just practiced, and we were playing like 1-0. Actually, we were playing 21 with a friend of mine, Craig Reeves, that played football at U of A, and Bruce Frazier, who was not even working with Steve at the time. And now he's his assistant.
Right.
We were goofing around, and Steve was saying that, Pop came in that day and was like, hey, we lost. No big deal. Like, there's a lot bigger things in the world. There's things going on that, in the country, in the nation, in the world that are way bigger than a loss. And I think the perspective, that Steve has as a coach, some of these coaches, man, they get so wrapped up. They have no other perspective on anything. And I think Steve has great perspective. So I think that keeps his team pretty calm through the ups and downs.
You know what? I think he does an excellent job as well. And again, this is just me observing. I'm not talking to Steve like the guy over to my my left, your right, depending on how. I think he does an amazing job of putting guys into their roles. Now, you brought up Andrew Wiggins earlier. I want to talk about this, and this is not meant to be demeaning because, again, I'm sitting here doing a podcast with an A behind my back. Andrew Wiggins is worth over $150 million. So, but Andrew Wiggins always had the knock of being a very athletic guy that was never really able to find his role. Mentally is not the term that I'm going for, but you know what his role was. When I look at what he does now, the Warriors, I think, and again, the Warriors were able to simplify and be able to get the best out of Wiggins by saying, all right, you're going to be a lockdown defender. That's 50% of your job right here. You're athletically gifted enough to get the other person's wing. Draymond can help you, but that's going to be your role. You get a couple dribbles on offense to be able to slash. You're going to slash off cuts. You're going to shoot open shots. And lo and behold, you get a fringe all-star that's turned into a winning basketball player. So a lot of times I think guys get hit with the label that, oh, well, they just don't understand basketball. And sometimes they don't. But it also helps when you've got a coach like Steve Kerr and you get out of a place like Minnesota that is able to show you exactly what you need to do at that specific time. Because keep in mind, a guy like Wiggins played for Bill Self for 1 year. He's essentially been in the NBA or the AAU circuit his entire life.
Yeah, no question. Who's the guy they had, the lefty last year?
D'Angelo Russell.
No, the other lefty.
Kelly Oubre. Kelly
Oubre. And I think Steve probably recognized they couldn't, like, it didn't work with both of them because they were both sort of wing slashers, really athletic guys. You know, they traded Oubre. And you're right. I think what they did with Wig is they and I think Steve really coached up his, like you said, his IQ on the court, but simplified it, made it super simple. You do these 3 or 4 things, whereas a guy like Andre Iguodala, maybe the smartest basketball player to ever play in the NBA, he coaches him different, I think. And Andre, of course, obviously a little bit aging and still's got a little bit of that spring and that wiggle, as you like.
He showed a little bit of a hop that first game.
He did. Yep.
Right.
Yep. But you know, Wig is like crazy top of the line athletic, has that jumper now. And you're right. And I think Steve learned all that by being a role player himself in the NBA. I mean, his was obviously as a shooter, but Phil Jackson Steve said he used to always put Steve in like with about 2 minutes to go in the first quarter. And so he'd put him in. It was kind of that little 2-minute stretch. They'd have a timeout. He'd play another, little minute stretch. And he said he used to put him in a lot at end of quarters, spread the floor, put in a 3-point shooter. And so Steve was always ready. He knew, like, even if my role was to come in even if in some games, if he came in for 10 seconds at the end of the first, second, or third, that was a role.
Right.
And so I think he saw what Phil did with those guys, with Judd Bushler. And Steve's unbelievable. And the other thing too, like, Steve trusts guys at the end of the bench. He puts them in big spots. They haven't played, like, you get a guy like Kuminga that hasn't maybe played, and all of a sudden he's starting in one game because of a guy being out or something. Right. So he's not afraid. He is not afraid. He doesn't have fear with playing players at different times.
One of my favorite Steve Kerr quotes was, and again, I'm paraphrasing it here because I'm not going to get this exactly, but he starts coaching the Warriors. And obviously we talked about it before. He wanted to come in with a far more open approach because you've got the 2 best shooters ever. And I don't know if it was your guy, Bruce Frazier, or it was one of the assistants, because Steve Kerr was getting on Steph a little bit for pulling up and shooting 40-foot shots or, wherever it was. And I think it was Bruce Frazier who said, and Steve was quoting him and said, we've charted all the shots because they chart everything in practice. Right. And he says 52% of the shots that you've gotten on Steph Curry for shooting, he's made or something. And, it was just, and again, I wasn't quite what that was, but that was the essence of it. And then Steve Kerr says, that's kind of when I knew that I just had to let these guys go. Right. And you've got to, it's like you said, you've got to be able to coach people differently. I always go back to the Bill Parcells quote when they would say, why do you scream at Phil Simms and you let Lawrence Taylor, stay out until 2 a.m, on Coke binges? And he said, because Lawrence Taylor isn't going to handle that the same way that Phil Simms is going to handle it. Right. That's just the way. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the scouting and about the end of the bench that you brought up here. But first, DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX. Matt Muehlebach and I have been talking all season. I said that I thought the Heat were going to win it all. It was a valiant effort, but you know what? I fell short. It happens. So if you think that Mike Luke's an idiot, hop on the DraftKings Sportsbook app and say, Mike likes the Warriors to win this. I'm going to go with the Celtics. You just got to be 21 and up, Arizona only, Gambling problem, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. Again, you put in $5, get $150 in free plays as long as that game happens. All right, Matt. You mentioned the end of the bench. I think it's a very interesting key here. And this is something that Lute did as well. And I bring this up quite often. I always kind of harken back to when Jason Terry was a freshman. And Lute started sneaking him in important games towards the end of the games. I want to say that Washington came to town when JT was a freshman. And JT's averaging, 5-6 minutes a game. JT goes off for 23, 24 points. He gets a few minutes the rest of the season. Lo and behold, he's starting next year with Miles out and eligible. I get the sense that Steve Kerr is doing much of the same thing with a Kuminga, with a Moody, guys like that are going to have a bigger role next year. You can't really have them in for major minutes, but you want to get their feet wet. And I think that's going to do them an incredible amount of good for next year.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, it's you gotta have like now, but you also got to look to the future, right? And they've got to be able to give those guys the superstars minutes that are getting a little older. You mentioned something about Steve, and it just hit me about the coaches he played for. And I actually think he played for 6 Hall of Fame coaches. So if you go through it, it's Lute, it's Cotton Fitzsimmons with the Suns.
Right.
It's Lenny Wilkins with the Cavs.
That's right. He did play for Lenny.
It was Phil and Pop. That's 5, and then I think the 6th is it Johnny Bach?
Right. Wow. You're right. He played for. And 3 of the top 15 coaches of all time, along with him in there.
Right. I mean, it's and obviously he's played with probably the greatest player of all time. He's coaching he's coaching the greatest shooter of all time.
Coach probably the greatest team of all time. You and I were talking about that the other day.
Coached the greatest team of all time, played on the other greatest team.
Right.
Those are the 2 arguments on the 2 greatest team. Played on one, coached on the other. His connections and what he has done and like been involved with, it's almost second to none. Like it's, if they did them like The Last Dance, I think I've watched it now. I'm probably going on about 7.
And it's still on Netflix too, so I keep watching it too.
I'm watching it. I watch it constantly.
Right.
They need to do and he's going to hate me for saying this, but they need to do like a 10 episode thing on just Steve. Like the one episode on him and, just obviously the stuff with his dad that was really tough. And but just to, the shot he made and everything. I mean, it's amazing. And he's got way more stories than that with the Bulls, the Warriors, obviously the Spurs, etc.
Because you played with Steve for 3, you shared the same roster with him for 4 years, correct?
No, I was only 1. I was here in 80.
No, excuse me. I'm getting him and Sean, you and Sean mixed up. My bad. Sorry. I was going through my notes. That's not a bad person to be mixed up with, right?
No, it was just 1 year.
Right, for sure. So he comes back from his knee injury. You're on 87, 88. What were your how did he deal with that? Because again, you only shared the 1 year with him, but this was an injury at the time that a lot of people thought was a career ender. You're not coming back from that. Not only does he come back from that, he's a second-team All-American, puts up one of the most efficient seasons. And was that just part of his demeanor that was able to get him through that?
Yeah, I don't know how he did it. Your boy Kevin O'Neill, when I came on a recruiting trip, he looked over and said to me, he said, "Are you ready to play next year?" I said, "Why?" He's like, "Well, Kerr's never going to play again." And he was just, he was trying to make me feel good about coming in and getting some playing time. But I don't know how Steve did it. Back then the technology was not as good as it is now for ACL injuries.
Right.
He came back. He was better than he was even before that. He hadn't really played exclusively the point guard position.
Right.
And Lute had a number of guys that had not done that. Guys like Reggie Geary that thrived in it. Steve Kerr thrived in it. I think there was maybe a player or 2 other, but he had like 32 turnovers the entire season. It was insane. Right. He shot, he was over 60% at one point going into the last game. I think he was over 60% from 3. Right. It's insane. But I think ultimately he's a normal guy like you and I. I mean, even though he has all these amazing sort of magical things.
Matt, he's much closer to you than me. Stop. Well, I
Maybe.
did want to get to my next point because that's where I got you mixed up with Sean looking at my notes. So you've got 87, 88. And I've had quite a few people mention this, and I'm going to start probably working on an article about this. If there is a more successful group of people, just in general, in society from a basketball team, I would love to see it. When you've got, we talked about this when we were grabbing a couple beers. You've got Harvey Mason, who's head of the Grammys. You got Kenny Lofton, who's a borderline baseball Hall of Famer. You got Sean. You got Steve. You got Judd Bushler. You got Tolbert. You got Matt Muehlebach, who is a lawyer, who is a commentator, who is a friend of Mike Luke, a jack of all three trades right there. But when you guys were coming up, just that season right there, Matt, did you realize, wow, did you have any idea just kind of the special group of people, let alone basketball, that you were dealing with there?
Honestly, I did.
Did you? Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
It was weird. We started pickup games. I remember, I got here my freshman year. We started pickup games in August. I fell in love with Tucson. The weather when we had the monsoons. It was crazy monsoons that year. Mm-hmm. And I remember we used to go play. We actually were playing at the Tucson. I think it was not the Racket Club, but it was like one of the workout places because McHale was under renovation. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't anything. It was fine. Everybody was working out. It was good. But for some reason, when we started, and we started doing some weights and we started doing other things, like about a month into it, you could kind of feel it. Mm-hmm. And you could feel it building just in the off season. And then we started practice October 15th. And by October 15th, I had already felt like this kind of like a little bit of magic happening with the team. As of October 15th, first day of practice, like for the first 2 or 3 weeks, I honestly felt it. Like it felt kind of magical.
Right.
And I knew it at the time. Like I'm not saying you could look back and say, oh, now that I look back. No. I had some really good high school teams, some close to that, like in amazing chemistry. But you could feel the magic happening. And then we went, of course, in November, we went to Alaska and we kind of shocked.
Great Alaska Shootout.
We shocked the basketball world by beating Michigan and Syracuse back-to-back to win it. And it like I said, I was not surprised when we won it. I don't think anybody else was.
Wow. No, for sure. Okay. So getting back then to just what we're watching then on the floor, you and I have talked a lot about Steph Curry. And what you're watching in this finals. Well, has Steph Curry been a positive for the maturation of basketball players? Because I now see it, and you see the thing there because you've got the best shooter of all time, right. But you can see it in AAU games. You could see it at the park. Kids pulling up from 35 feet now in a 3-on-1 fast break. Right. Is Steph Curry, the idea of Steph Curry, is that good for basketball?
Well, yeah, like on a small level, it's your local LA Fitness. It's horrible because every time I walk in there, guys are shooting 40-footers and sometimes hitting the side of the backboard or the top of the backboard. But, I think it's a great thing because if you remember.
Oh, real quick, sorry to interrupt you. Did I tell you who I saw at LA Fitness about a week and a half ago? I'm not going to tell the people. What's that?
Mike Dickerson.
I did.
Yeah, that's where I saw him too.
And it's funny too because
he plays.
He plays. That's the thing. Right. It's so funny. So I'm looking at him, and again, he still stands out because, physically, Mike D looks different than other people. And I'm looking around, and there's a couple other people then because by then I'm just staring at him. I'm not even doing my workout. And you see a couple people that are looking around, and they're like, and then, but he's just has no clue that anybody's watching him. He's doing his workout, and then he's going in to shoot hoops. But when you brought up LA Fitness, I thought of Mike D. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I've seen him there as well. I lost my train of thought. What were we?
We're talking about Steph Curry.
Oh yeah, I think back to like the middle to late '90s, right? And it felt like basketball was really becoming bully ball, and and everything was based on athleticism, strength, getting to the rim, dunking on guys. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think, the skill part of it there was a time where, in fact, they were trying to change the rules because it just was a mini football game at times. And, I think and then, a lot of the European influence was huge for American basketball because of the skill, the shooting, especially the big men shooting. But I think what Steph's done is great. I think, understanding that skill players can play. You don't have to be, 6'8" and have a 44-inch vertical. So I think it's been great for that. I think it's brought more players and more people into the game.
Right. I think with Steve, now let me ask you this, because we're coming up on time here. How many championships with this group of guys does Steve Kerr end up with? Just looking into the future. He's got 3 right now. Could easily get a 4th right here. What if Matt Muehlebach had to look into the future? What would he say for that?
I mean, I don't doubt him, but it's like to be honest, like even if you get one more, it's insanely good. Like think about how good the Suns are and have been at times. They've never won a title. Like,
right. Trust me, I know.
You're an Arizona guy, right? We talked about that. I mean, I thought they were going to win it this year.
Yeah.
I thought they were going to win it last year.
Right.
I thought they were going to win it a couple times with Steve Nash. I thought they might win it with Chuck, back in the 90s. So, I mean, even if they win this one, it's almost a Herculean, task that they accomplish. And I think the odds are they probably will, but I mean, it's 50-50 at this point now that it's tied up. Right. But if they just win one more, I think it's amazing, right? I mean, it's again, you got Steph and Clay that are getting older, and they've got to build all these guys up somehow. Sign Poole, they still have Wiseman that they're trying to figure out. So I don't know, but if I had to guess, I'd say maybe 1, maybe 2.
All right, Matt, I had a message here, and this is something that I have not done a good job of. Can you please talk a little bit about Bruce Frazier? Bruce Frazier is the guy that Arizona fan, I think, knows of. They know that he played here. They know that he's around Steve Kerr, but it's not a guy that is just, vintage, that people remember. Can you just describe a little bit about Bruce Frazier from his time? And now, granted, he was out of here in '87. I get that. But, just his role with Steve Kerr and how that friendship, that relationship came about.
Well, Bruce, his dad was a coach. His dad actually coached at Long Beach. I think it was Long Beach City College, and was friends with Lute.
Right.
When Lute was out at Marina High School and then Long Beach State. And they were pretty good buddies. And he knew about Bruce, recruited him, came to Arizona. Bruce's career, he had the talent and the body and everything else to be an all Pac-10 player. Didn't really happen. But he was best buddies with Steve. Bruce was actually the reason I came to Arizona. Like, he sealed it for me. When I was on my recruiting trip, he was a senior. I loved him. He was like the glue that held the team together, like the funniest guy on the team. A great basketball mind, like because of his dad, because of like, he's a smart guy. But Bruce is a couple of things that he's amazing at is, one, he's incredibly observant. He's one of those guys that doesn't try to tell you how smart he is. And the basketball people that do, right? They try to prove how smart they are and what they know. He's the direct opposite. He doesn't, in fact, he'll purposely not say stuff because he likes to watch people, watch things happen. He's incredibly observant. It's almost like his number one skill, and he watches everything. He watches people, how they react, how they interact, how they play, how they coach. And he's like, for Steve, he's like the eyes and ears of the whole team. He has a pulse on every player. He's one of the guys, like, honestly, like, you can go into a party, a cocktail or something, and he's like, he can tell you about people right away. Like, I know what that guy's about. Like, he's he doesn't let guys, the one thing he doesn't do is he does not let guys, blow you away with BS. I mean, it just will not happen.
Right.
He is not at all intimidated or taken aback by anything. Cause he's super like watchful about all those guys. And I think, with Steph, what made him amazing was he never once tried to go in and prove anything to Steph.
Right.
He built the relationship with him, and now he's Steph's guy. Like, if you watch during the games, where does Steph sit?
Right.
He sits next to Q.
Right.
Every game.
And explain Q, please, because another guy asked me, where did Q? I know where it comes from, but explain that to me. I didn't know it until we actually, we had some drinks, but explain that to me.
I guess I wasn't around, but I guess he was asking so many questions that
Right.
his first year at U of A that I think it was Brock Brunkhorst or one of the players started calling him Q for question man.
Right.
And that's how it became. And, everybody in the NBA knows him as Q. Everybody at U of A, everybody associated with him, half the people probably don't even know his first name is Bruce.
You know what's unfortunate too? He's kind of stuck in that little bit of that era where people know about Pete Williams and Eddie Smith because that got Arizona off the ground. And then there's kind of that year or two, that bridge before before 87, 88, 88, 89, where Arizona really hits the big time. And Bruce is kind of sandwiched right in between both of those eras right there. So, and I think with Arizona fans, they have such a recollection of players and teams, not necessarily the year, but they remember Damon and Khalid. They remember Steve and Sean. They remember Pete and Eddie. They don't necessarily remember years, if that makes any sense.
No, I think you're right. And he does like bridge so many different kind of gaps there.
Right.
And I'll tell you, I think I've told you this story, but I have two quick stories. One is I asked him many, many years ago when he was doing an internship for Larry Brown with the Pacers. Mm-hmm. I said, hey, who's a guy in the NBA that I don't really think about? I don't want you to tell me Larry Bird or, some all-star, but I don't think about who can like light it up and get 40 a night. He thought about it for like 5 seconds and he's like, Del Curry. He's like, that's the guy. And I was like, oh, okay.
Wow.
And then of course his son becomes that guy. Yeah. I asked him these kind of questions every year. I asked him going into this year, I said, name me a player or two on your team that's going to like surprise people and kind of light it up and they're going to kind of come out. And he thought about it and he said, Jordan Poole and Otto Porter. And,
wow.
He had it dialed in.
And that's amazing scouting too, because I watched a lot of Jordan Poole in college, thought he was good. Yep. Thought he could maybe be a nice role player. I didn't think that he'd be an NBA all-star type that, is going to possibly prolong this. So those are really – and Otto Porter's been around for years. So it's not like this is some, unknown guy or something.
Right.
All right, we're going to get Matt's prediction on the series here before we sign off. But again, the DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX. You put in $5, you get $150 in free plays. You got to be a new customer, though. Games on at 6 tonight. All right, Matt. If you were on the DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX, and you had to say, all right, the series is tied up 1-1. Where am I going with this one? Now, two things. Your heart and your mind.
I think they're going to split in Boston. Mm-hmm. I think they'll win in San Francisco. I think they'll lose in Boston. They'll win in San Francisco for Game 7.
Oh, and then one other thing I've got to ask. Can you please tell people why Steve Kerr won't ever come back and coach the University of Arizona? I get this asked to me once a month, and I keep forgetting to ask you to just elaborate a little bit on this. But so many people say, well, he'll come back to Arizona. No, Matt, you explain.
There's like 5 reasons, right? I mean, the portal, classroom checks, recruiting. I mean, he lives a pretty good life right now. The guy coaches a couple hours a day, deals with a lot of heat if they don't win, but if they win, they have a lot of fun, and that's it. Then he's done for the day. Like college coaches these days, man, it is 24/7 every day of the year.
And the great thing about it too is that he's got the best job security in the world because no guy who's ever been put on the list of the top 15 coaches of all time is ever going anywhere unless he wants to go anywhere. They've got it going forward in the future. Yeah. I always tell people that, but I don't think the average fan realizes that college basketball is far more of a grind when it comes to coaching than actually coaching the NBA is.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute grind. The recruiting process, just all the stuff you got to deal with, young kids. I mean, Steve's dealing with pros, right? They're responsible for what they do. They don't, they deal with them off the court a tiny bit, but that's not what they deal with. So yeah, and how crazy is this? You think of all the Arizona basketball players, and I'll ask you this because you have a better grasp on the history, but Steve's a 100% Hall of Famer as a coach. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's 3 ways you can get into the Hall of Fame: as a player, as a coach, and I think for you're a contributor to basketball. It's the Dick Vitale thing, right? And I think Steve probably makes it on the coach and contributor because of all his TNT and what he did for the game and GMs and everything. But I can't think of another U of A player that's going to go into the Hall of Fame. Can you?
No, the only guy that you could possibly see making that case is Iguodala.
Yeah,
and
that's right. I forgot about Iguodala.
But again, Steve is, and as great as Andre's been, Steve is so much. You can't really write the history of basketball without talking about Steve Kerr. That's the best. That's the best way that I can put it. With Iggy, you can do that, but yeah, I can't think of anybody. He's that dude though, for sure. Matt Muehlebach is that guy as well. Matt, I'm going to text you something when we get off here though to ask Bruce Frazier about a player though.
Okay.
But Matt, I can't thank you enough for hopping on here. Matt Muehlebach, aka Kevin O'Neill. Next time we hang out, I got some more pockets, or got to pick your brain a little bit there.
Sounds good. All right, Mike. Thanks, man.
All right, Matt. Can't thank you enough. Matt Muehlebach. I'm Mike Luke. You've been listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast.